Hello and welcome to today's webcast hosted by the Sales Management Association. Let me introduce myself. I'm Bob Kelly. I'm Sales Management Association Chairman. On today's session, I'm pleased to introduce an excellent speaker, Jason Rothbaum from Exactly. Jason Rothbaum is a senior principal at Exactly, a provider of enterprise-class cloud-based incentive compensation solutions for employee and sales performance management. Jason works with Exactly's clients to improve Salesforce effectiveness. Before joining Exactly, he was Director of Sales, Compensation Support, and Strategy for Charter Communications and Director of Sales Operations for CBL Path. Thank you, Jason Rothbaum, for being with us today. It's always great to have you with us. Welcome, and thank you for being here.
Thank you. So this is an interesting time of year. It's usually when people are analyzing their plans and looking for ways to improve them. It can be difficult to figure out where to start when you're tasked with redesigning a compensation plan. It's actually usually easier to do a stripped down and complete redesign than figuring out how to do minor adjustments to existing plans to improve the performance. There are many different avenues to assess current plans. I'm going to go over the few of the quantitative analysis that I use and how they're geared towards building a consensus by presenting facts. That doesn't mean this is the only way. It's just my way. I try to keep the data requirements when I do the data analysis to a minimum. Obviously, if there's more digging required, the data requirements go up. But this is just a singular way that I choose to do it. It's very intuitive from my perspective. So to start it off, what am I usually looking for when I analyze plans? What is it that I'm usually accountable to? I'm usually accountable to three areas. First is the overall leadership of the company, and I'm trying to answer different questions for them. Are the compensation plans driving the overall strategy that we've laid out? For finance, am I mitigating risk? Am I minimizing the exposure of the company to explosive payouts, to blowing up the plans, which is defined as paying out over budget but coming in under sales forecast? For the sales force, are the plans motivating? Are they a proper tool from the sales leadership team to drive behaviors? So the inputs I usually start off with are pretty simple: historical pay performance measures, understanding the plan structures. I've run the sales ops teams for companies where we've had 10 plans, and then I've run the sales ops teams for companies that have thousands of plans. You pick the ones obviously that are the more strategic, the ones that are more in the crosshairs of people. So with that, the first analysis that I usually conduct is just the pay versus performance. Or I'm sorry, is the assessment of the measures. You usually spend very little time assessing if the correct measures are being used. I'll be honest, this gets a lot of the heat from leadership. We should be measuring here. We should be measuring here. Look, in November, we're usually fairly certain where our measures are going to be. It's not a wholesale redesign. Usually the measures are a quicker discussion. If they're not, it's a larger project. If it's a refinement, measures go quickly. But the things that I'm interested in measures are the weights. Whenever we talk about weights, it's usually a discussion of where the emphasis of the pay is going to be. What do we want our people to primarily do? If we change the weight from 35 to 40%, okay, interesting. Usually doesn't have too big of an impact. But for those that don't understand, a weight is how much incentive is allocated to a measure. So if you have 100K in incentive, a measure has 40% weight. That means that 40K is allocated towards that measure if they hit their targets. Usually, as I said, the weight reflects the importance of that measure in the sales strategy. So the first thing I said that I do is analyze whether or not the strategy is being met. And I do that by pay mix and pay levels analysis. Okay. For anyone who's ever seen a graph like this, congratulations. There are a million different versions of this. I've seen them with dots. I've seen them with the bars and strings. I've seen them all different ways. They're all basically getting towards the same thing. It's an analysis of where is the pay going, and you look at each source of pay, what the overall payout for that source is, and whether that meets where the company targeted. You have to do it by measure, by plan. So if you have a lot of measures, you're going to have a lot of charts like this. This was one I did a little while ago for a plan that had 34 reps on it. We wanted to see the overall health of the measures and whether or not they were achieving their strategy. When you look at this graph, most of the people are earning their money on base. The base is a high percentage of pay for 26 out of the 34 reps, right? So what the company was used to doing was looking at the average pay and the average incentive, average base and average incentive, and looking at the mix going, okay, well, we targeted a 50-50 mix and we're at 49-51. So we're very good. When I dug into it, 26 of the 34 reps were earning almost nothing. And the 8 reps who were earning the most were dragging that average up. And so it was a really cool way as me as a consultant coming in and saying, oh, well, you have pay concentration. You have very few reps pulling most of the incentive. And, in this example, it was from the primary measure, but they had tons of measures in the plan that no one was getting any incentive on. Okay, so that had a bigger discussion. Okay, they had a trainer incentive. It was targeted, I think, at 5% of the plan. 0 people earned on the trainer incentive. They had a new business incentive, which was supposed to motivate people to drive new hunting. Very few people were earning a significant portion of their pay based off that. So the plan was failing on a number of levels. So this type of a graph gave us insights immediately into dead weight in the plan, where we have money to spend elsewhere. One of the first things I said was the low-hanging fruit. Take the trainer pay, get rid of that, put it into the new business incentive. Try to drive up more there if it's a strategic priority. The next thing is that you have those that have and those that don't have. So we've got to increase plan participation. And how you do that is a longer strategic discussion. We had weights in the plan that were completely not being met on an individual level, but aggregate, they looked fine actually. So this is a really good place to start to look at the overall health of the plan. That's not the only way to do it. It's just the way I find visually pleasing. There's a lot of software out there that does this by default and to show you the plan weights and the plan health. So this is a very good place to start at the end of the year. I don't necessarily show this to the senior leadership to try to get consensus, but this is where I start digging. The next chart is the bread and butter of compensation analysis, the scatter plot. This is really where most consultants will start. This is where, when I ran sales ops departments at Adecco, Charter, Veridian, Sonic, this is really what I would pull out and start doing the hardcore analysis. What you do is you look at the percent of quota being achieved by someone versus the percent of target pay. So you have 2 percentages being compared. If you don't have quotas, it's going to look like a shotgun blast. If you have people with commission rates and you don't really have a target incentive, it's going to look like a shotgun spewing from the origin. You could still analyze it. It's just a little clearer when you use percent of target pay and a percent of quota. So what you're looking at is an actual company that I pulled pay versus performance, and it tells you immediately, how are people achieving? Well, most of the people in this graph were above 100%. Okay. It tells you how accurate your quotas are. They're all really tightly grouped together. It's not a range of 0 to 800. It's really tight between 100 and about 120%. There's some outliers, but it's really accurate quotas. From a practitioner's perspective, if I were looking at something like this, I could design changes to a comp plan to make it more effective. From the prior chart, I can tell you the overall health. This is the one where I can start making specific recommendations. Let's take an example. No one achieved below 90% in this graph. Most achieved above 100%. That's very accurate quotas. You know what? They might even be too low. One of the first things I would recommend is raising quotas. Imagine how popular that would make me. By the way, when I ran sales ops internally, I would have a lock on my door. I mean, we're not here for a popularity contest. So one of the first things you look at and you say is, you know what? I think only 5 people achieve below quota. Raise quotas. I would recommend that the plan is fine, but this is risky if someone in sales or in finance said, let's increase the over quota payouts. Well, that's pretty risky, isn't it? Being that the majority of people came in over quota. All right, so we already have a sense of financial risk. Once we know quota accuracy and how people are being paid against it in what is essentially a payout curve, we can gauge financial risk. So we look at this and we can already look at per measure analyses. This is just one measure. If you have 3 core metrics in a compensation plan, you do this by metric and you could find out, where's my volatility? Where's my risk coming from? If I have in this measure, everyone really grouped tightly around 100%, but for a second measure, they're scattered from here to Washington, it's a problem. That's where the risk is coming from. We can make changes to the payout curves here with reasonable certainty, but if the scatter plot was from here to, I'll use Valhalla this time, from here to Valhalla, we're introducing an element of risk to the company. So this is something you can use and something you can already make analyses of. You can get pay distributions, quota accuracy, participation, dispersion. We'll go through these one at a time. Let's look at the curve first on the high end. This is the same performance distribution that we had. Now we want to start looking at adjusting the curve. If I'm looking at making end of year adjustments, the first thing I'm going to look at is, where do I set my high performer pay? And by the way, this could change year to year, but this time I want to look at just above quota performance because we have a lot of people performing above quota, and it's important to know how we want that slope, that payout slope above 100% to be set. In order to set the payout curve, we need 2 points. First point is, where is the top performer? Second point, where do we want to pay them? So let's answer the second question first. How do we want to pay our top performers? This is a concept called leverage. This is the amount that the top performers can expect to earn if they hit top performance level. Leverage is really dependent on a lot of things, but 2 primary things. How are other companies paying their top performers? And what's the risk, the amount of risk the rep is taking? Okay, so how do we find out how other companies are paying? Well, we use benchmarking. We compete for top talent. They'll definitely tell you how other companies are paying as well. funny, top performers are never bashful about how much they should earn. They're going to tell you that in competitive companies, or benchmarking is going to tell you that if I hit 200% of my quota or 300%, I should be earning 3 times my target pay. Okay, that's really great. That's how much we should pay. That's the height of the payout curve. But now we need to find at what point that they should earn that amount. What percent of quota? You can't use benchmarking for that. This is highly dependent on your company's ability to set quotas accurately. If you are in, I'll use a specific company here. If you're in Coca-Cola, you've got a pretty good historical average. You know what customers buy. You're going to have pretty good quotas, and you're going to have a really, really good estimate as to where overperformance is going to be. It might be at 120%. You're going to look at historicals, and you're going to say, you know what? Top performer hits 90%, right? Hits 120%. That's where we want to be. Great. But if you are in a startup company, you have no clue what your quota accuracy is going to be. You don't know what market potential is going to be. If you set it at 120%, you're going to have a lot of people being paid a high amount. Okay. I was dealing with a company that swore up and down the line that they had great quota accuracy. And then I looked at a scatter plot. The top person hit 854% of their quota. You know how do I remember that exact number? It's the highest I've ever seen. It's not 855, 854%. This was 5 years ago, and I still remember that number. And they swore that they set quotas accurately. Meanwhile, that person got a $1.2 million payout. Right? You don't set your quotas accurately if you have someone hitting 854%. Just not happen. So you are not going to set that top performer pay at 120% if you have people who are going to hit 854%. You're going to set it further out. So it's the same amount that they can earn at another company based off of the benchmarking, but the point at which they earn that is much further out because your company can't set quota. Okay. Third thing, you have to define what a top performer is. It's not your top person. The reason that you set it, and you can see from the graph, I defined it as the 90th percentile performer. Your top person might be at 854%. Your next performer, your second highest, might be at 110%. You shouldn't penalize everyone else for an outlier. So we set it at the 90th percentile, and we say, where does that person historically hit? They hit about 150%. That's where we're going to pay top dollar. What's top dollar? We're going to look at the market, and we're going to pay, let's say, 250% of target pay there. That's how we set above quota payout curves. At the end of the year, every year, I'm looking at that. Every year, I might recommend to leadership of the company, we have to adjust it. Okay, we are paying too little, we're paying too much, whatever it is, I'm coming with a recommendation. Now, whether they listen or not, we still have the facts. Okay, and we can quantify it at that point, saying if we keep it at its current level, we have historically this many people going over. Here is our financial exposure for explosive payouts. Is that something you're willing to accept? Well, negotiations become more interesting when you come with facts. So that's how we set the above quota. The above quota gets the most focus by far. Everyone always loves talking about the top performers. They know their names. They know their kids' names. They've been at the company for a while. Having said that, moving the needle, it's usually the bulk of people who are performing in the middle, and they usually occurs below quota. Moving the mighty middle, compensation plans are a good tool, not the greatest tool, but they are a very good tool for moving the mighty middle. The mighty middle even moving it a little is going to have much more impact than trying to move the above quota a lot to achieve more. If someone's hitting 150% of their quota, offering them more money to hit 160% usually doesn't work because they're already in the money and they're already hitting the gas as hard as they can. And what often happens is you're just paying high earners more money for the performance they would have gotten anyway. But below quota, there's a concept called motivational traction. If you can get someone who's performing at 55, 60% to perform at 65, 70%, that's going to have a huge impact to the bottom line because that's where you're going to have more people. So how do we do it? There are 3 different ways. And you see on the table below, there are 4, but one of them is really just a kind of an offshoot of the other. So first one is straight line, paying from 0 to 100%. Every 1% of quota pays 1% of target, just straight line commission. That doesn't have a lot of impact, and you can't really motivate people to improve their performance. This is usually used by companies that don't have a great grasp of where their people are performing. They don't have great quotas. The more powerful thing to do is called a kink or a tier. What does a kink do? If you have people who are performing at, let's say, 55%, and you want to move them up to 65%, you put a kink in the performance curve. A kink pays, let's say, 1% from 0 to 60, and then 3% from 60 to 100. Well, now if you're a manager out there, you're going to be yelling at people, come on, I know you can't get above quota, but you could still make it in the money. You could still earn more. You got something to do. Get out of bed, do those phone, whatever, however motivational your managers can be. I've seen people say that actually, but I've always found it more motivating to say, if you can sell one more deal, that's going to pay you marginally this much more money. Any case, a kink is very effective. Where do you set the kink? Just above where the middle performers are. Try to pull them up the curve. Try to get them to perform that much more. Okay? The ultimate in motivation is a threshold, a cliff, whatever you want to call it. It's a minimum performance level. If you look at our accurate quotas on the left, no one's performing below 90. Why am I paying from 0 to 90%? If someone does come in below 90, I'm so good at quotas, I know that that's underperformance. Why am I even paying them? The threshold would say you get 0 until you hit 90%. That's pretty motivational. That also, if you can catch the stragglers, that creates a great way to reallocate pay from low to high performers. Okay, there's a problem with setting a minimum performance level at 90%. Your effective commission rate is 10% for each point. Remember, going from 91 to 100% is 10 steps. That means for each step, you have to get 10% of your target pay. That creates some ridiculous commission rates. That is hilariously large commission rates. So I go to companies where they have a threshold and they're paying, starting at 90%, they start paying 91%, they start paying, and they'll have commission rates of like 22%. And then over quota, they'll fall back down to 5%. Okay, so the top performer starts saying, you're cutting my pay, you're cutting my pay. Well, not really, it's just the math. So companies will put in this mechanic called a catch and release. Okay, it's a lump sum paid when you hit 90%. If you hit 90%, we'll pay you 50% of your target pay. And then from 91 to 100, you'll get 5%. Above 100, you get 7%. It's just a way to try to make the optics a little bit better. I'm indifferent to either of them. One doesn't work necessarily better than the other. If reps have really great control over their sales ability, they might hit 90%, stop if they're not sure they can hit 100. I don't know how much that happens. Um, if you have really good quotas, it shouldn't be that much of an issue. Any case, the mechanics under quota, just to reemphasize one more time, have much more of an impact than the mechanics over quota. The mechanics over quota are just dangerous because you can explode the company's payout. Below quota, you can actually move performance and actually create more rate of return for the company. Okay, I'm speaking very quickly. Sorry, we got a bunch more slides to go through. My favorite. This is my absolute favorite thing to happen. When I see outliers, it actually makes my day. Outliers make life interesting. I couldn't even hide my enthusiasm when I created this slide. Outliers are someone has done something that you didn't design for. Outliers are some manager gave a rep a specialized plan, a unique pay plan. Maybe it didn't get approved. An outlier might be due to a deal cap, might be due to kickers. Something unintentional is happening in there that you didn't design for. This is where you know that you have some leverage in the compensation plan when you come to the negotiations and when you come to the negotiating the changes. So picture it like this. We want to remove some of the unique pay plans. Well, why? Why? Because someone's hitting over quota and yet they're still hitting under 100%. Well, there are all sorts of things like that. They were on a unique pay plan. We have off-plan compensation. Yeah, but from a finance perspective, now I can't compare the cost of sale across reps. Okay, or we have deal caps. Why do we have deal caps? You know, what is the strategic need behind a deal cap? If there is one, fine. If you had 7 people working on a deal, this is going to identify it. You're going to have a deal cap in there to prevent everyone from getting their pay blown out. Now we should talk about the participation on sales. Why do we have 7 people participating in a sale? In other words, as a person analyzing the plans, when I see an outlier, I know that I have a pathway into a strategic discussion. Why do we have ramps on new hires or guarantees? If I see someone hitting 320, 350% of their compensation, great. They're on a new hire plan. They have guarantees. Why aren't we capping them? They're taking no risk on the low end. It's not like if they underperform, we're going to stop paying them. Okay. Why aren't they capping the reward on the high end? You don't take risk, you don't get reward. We should cap the new hire plans to prevent explosive payouts like that. See, I'm already having fun. I can't help it. It's just interesting when you get outliers. It leads the way to strategic discussions. If you have outlier plans, if you have, unique pay plans, talk about consolidating them. If you have acceleration, let's say that you have quarterly plans with quarterly acceleration. Okay. We obviously are having explosive payouts. Let's talk about that. Maybe we should have quarterly caps with an annual release. Maybe we have someone's quota completely messed up. Let's talk about that. So outliers, as I said, are an interesting thing. The last thing that I'll analyze, it's not necessarily this. Everything I analyze past the scatter plots are to find out where volatility is. Let me go back to the last slide. If I see that 350% occurring and I start digging into why that's happening, I find out, let's say that we set the wrong quota. Okay, why? Let's look at each region. Let's find the quotas. Let's find out what's happening there. The whole point behind a lot of these analytics is to mitigate risk for the company. Remember, that was slide number 1. Part of mitigating that risk is finding out where volatility is coming from. Is it coming from quotas? Is it coming from unique plans? Is it coming from new hires? Is it coming from a specific metric? Where are we encountering the risk? My final analysis, as I said, doesn't necessarily need to be this, but it'll be identifying where the risk is coming from and have ways to mitigate it. So this one was an example of a consumer products company where they had different regions. And I looked at the average, or I looked at the entire quota, I looked at the actual, and I looked at the plus or minus on it. This is a simple one. If you knew where your quota volatility was coming from, or where your volatility in your pay was coming from, you probably would have plugged it a while ago. But this is just a simple example. This one I found the Northeast. Why were we setting quotas so completely off? And then I had a discussion with the head of the Northeast region. This was a consulting gig, so I called him up and I said, "What's going on? You're setting the quotas. Why are you getting them so low?" Well, we had a new competitor in the region. It took some market share. We underset. Okay, that is a really good discussion to have. Now, we know that the actuals for the Northwest are coming in low. Although in aggregate, we came in right around quota. We found volatility in the Northwest. This was driving, in this particular company, all the Northwest people, all the Northwest reps down. Okay, so let's talk about that. Do we need to consolidate territories to try to equalize workload? Do we need to introduce some sort of aggressive tactic to meet that threat? What is the discussion? How do we plug that volatility? Okay, if the volatility is coming from a specific metric, okay, you know what? Maybe we pull that out of the core plan, make it its own metric, and design the plan around the quota setting ability. I do that a lot. One of my favorite expressions is, you don't choose your quota accuracy, your quota accuracy chooses you. I usually get a good laugh, but since you're all on mute, I'm just assuming you're laughing on the call right now. But you got to find out where the volatility is coming from. If a specific metric in the plan has volatility, it's tough to put the same payout curve on it because you're increasing the risk to the company. If you have people who are just as likely to hit 0% as 300% just for one metric or one product, just putting the same payout curve on it, you're going to explode your pay. Okay, it might be easier to administer, but we have a duty to the company to mitigate risk. So my final thing is, after all of my prior analysis, I try identifying where we are off on things. Where's the volatility? And I create a final slide to do this, to analyze it. It usually requires more data request. It usually requires more analytics. But once you find where the volatility is coming from, your packet is complete. Now you can approach leadership and start talking about, here are my recommended changes to the comp plan. Here's the reason why. Here's the financial impact of making these changes. Here's the financial risk of not making these changes. That's simple as that. I do have a checklist that I typically go through, but those are the three analyses, or the two analyses with a follow-on, that I typically go through as a first blush. Some analyses I do on this. Sometimes I find that the higher tenured people tend to have more payouts for lower growth. There's some favorite analyses I go to, but usually I start with the scatter plots, and from there I have a fairly good idea of where I should dig next. So to wrap this up, I'll go through a checklist, and this is a pretty comprehensive checklist, but there are some nuances company by company. If I'm dealing in Europe, I'll add a separate chevron and say company culture. But usually I'm going through eligibility. Um, I've been getting a lot of that this year. Questions coming to me. Should CSMs be on a sales comp plan? Okay, I have entire discussions based off that. Should my applications engineers be on a comp plan? Okay, you discuss that. You look at that. Pay structures. I look at, is cash aligned, is pay mix where I want it to be, the leverage, the upside aligned with where I want the role to be. Are the top earners, where are they compared to market? What is the market? Then I'll go to plan measures. Um, the measures aligned with the business priorities. Usually that's the first discussion. Measures under the direct control of the rep. Um, okay, so I'm not as dogmatic as a lot of people out there. Do we have 3 or fewer measures? Look, if the person is earning 500,000 target incentive, you could have more than 3 measures. If the role earns 5K per year in target incentive, you should probably have 1. Um, are all measures weighted at 20% or more? Once again, I'm not as dogmatic on that. Um, like I said, if you have someone who's earning $500,000 per year in target incentive, 300,000, and you have a couple of measures in there at 10%, it's still $30,000 to $50,000. They're going to pay attention to it. 20%. Yeah, it's a good guiding light, but let's use our common sense here. Incentive mechanics. These tend to be more geared towards a redesign, a complete scrapping of the comp plan, and a, uh, a reinvestment into redesign. Most of the time, I'm looking at these and just checking the boxes. If I'm sitting in-house, I'm rarely changing the mechanics. What does that mean? Am I paying a commission plan versus a quota-based bonus plan? Percent of target incentive is, am I using the proper payout curve in general? Should I have a $1 payout plan versus a one with a threshold? I mean, there are some bigger moves you can make, but generally we're just tuning up. One of the bigger ones you can change is the pay period. Am I measuring people annually? Am I measuring them quarterly? You can pay them out monthly, but how often am I resetting their quota? That's a really big thing to change. So incentive mechanics are things that I make on my checklist, as well as motivational value of the plans. Once again, these are common sense things. Plan mechanics easy to understand. Do I have to take an hour to explain to someone when I do my rollout, my communication after I SKO and after I roll out the plans? Do I require a slide presentation that's more than 3 slides to explain the plan? I try to keep it as simple as possible. Uh, you know, I'll say that the complexity of the plan, you can go a little bit more complicated the higher up in the corporation that you move. So directors can have a little bit more complicated plans than reps. But in general, if they're easy to explain, great. How accurate are my quotas? Are they being achieved by at least half the people? By the way, that is not I'm not dogmatic about that either. I work with plenty of companies whose strategy is to have only 10% of the people achieve quota. Private equity owned companies, my God, they're notorious for having a large amount of people come in under quota and pay the ones who come in over quota like a king's fortune. So I'm not as dogmatic about that. Recognition programs, love recognition. They are effective. A pat on the back goes much, much further than you would think. President's Club, awesome. Risk mitigation. This is my finance chevron. Do I have windfall protection in place? Do my T's and C's meet muster? Do I have plans that can be tracked, administered. Uh, am I coming in close to my accruals and my forecast? All of those things actually have a massive impact on the effectiveness of the compensation plan. So I make sure that those are in my checklist, and I think that is it. I'll stop sharing now, Bob.
All righty. Thank you very much, Jason. Great presentation. Appreciate your insights. And I'll remind our audience, you can submit questions or comments now. We have a few minutes that we can get to at least some of these. You can do that by clicking through on the text link in your video window right now. Or if you would prefer, you may email your questions or comments to us at this email address, support@salesmanagement.org. We tried to make the email address longer, but that's the best we could come up with. So we have a few in the queue. Let's get to some of these questions. Let's see. Here is one. Okay, always popular, this idea. Would you recommend capping sales compensation earnings?
Okay, I'll say this. It's really easy as an external person to say, no, never cap.
Mm-hmm.
I would say that there are 3 or 4 situations where caps are acceptable. I already named one of them, which was a deal cap, when any one deal would explode a ton of people's compensation. The other 2, I think I also mentioned that for ramp plans, caps, if you have a guarantee or a draw or something in there, cap them. Because I've been dealing with so many companies where new hires are exploding out plans because they come in and they might have a few deals and they're hitting 300%, even though they're on a ramp. If you're not taking the risk on the low end of earnings, you shouldn't get the reward on the high end. People can come off their ramp plan onto the standard plan anytime they want. So I think that's acceptable. The third time is when you have quarterly payouts. Quarterly plans, and you have acceleration. Let's say on a cumulative plan, when you have Q1 is its own goal, and if you achieve above Q1, you get some acceleration. Q2 is equal to Q1 plus Q2. If you blow out Q1, you get a huge payout, and you tank it for the rest of the year. The company's going to end up paying out much more than they had budgeted and coming in way under what they forecasted sales. So capping on quarterly acceleration for an annual plan, perfectly acceptable. I'm going to throw in a fourth: culture. Europe, they still cap. It's accepted there for a lot of places. But other than that, I recommend other things rather than capping overall earnings. There are many things you can do. Extend the performance period. It's much more difficult to blow out your quota if it's annual than it is if it's monthly. What do you call that? Decelerate. So you have a 3-5-4 plan, 3% up to 100, 100 to 120, 5%, and then 4%. Slow down the payout rate. So in general, I can design a plan so that you don't need caps, but if your company is used to it, yeah, there it is.
Well put. Okay, let's get to some other questions. Okay, so here's a question. Let me just throw it up here without reading it. Reckless of me, but here goes. Do you recommend weighted attainment if a plan has 2 or more metrics, or accelerators? Should you deploy accelerators at individual metric attainment?
Weighted attainment. Okay. I can take that a few different ways.
Right. We might need some clarification on this. Thank you for the question, but take a shot at it.
I'll say that weighted attainment, I've seen it before where you get two products or something like that, and you have 2 different quotas, and you blow out one quota and completely I love using the word tank it today, so I'll use that expression. You tank it on the other one. You do poorly on the second one. Do you recommend taking the average of the two or weighting them in some way and applying it to the metrics? That's one way of doing it. I can think of two other ways that are more effective. But in general, I've seen it done like that. I've seen a link on the accelerators. What I do is, it adds to plan complexity, but it's awesome. You have one metric that pays, let's say, over quota of 5%. You have another metric that pays over quota of 7%. Okay, you know what? Great, congratulations. You've hit 100% on one metric. You're going to continue getting that under quota rate until you hit metric 2. That over quota rate's for the true top performers, and you have to hit both metrics to do that. So you don't get that 5 or 7% until you hit both metrics. That's called a link.
Mm-hmm. Good
or
stuff.
Soft gate. Okay. What else we got?
All right. Let's see. How do you prepare for volatile or unpredictable performance?
I think we went over a lot of that. And we were talking about that before the call, Bob.
Yeah.
In case you don't know it, Bob's an expert at this stuff. Completely.
Or an idiot savant. I like to use that term. It's
even a blind squirrel finds a nut.
Sure. There you go.
So if you have, let's take the two situations. First, unpredictable performance where you normally would have good quotas. So something comes in and we'll call it a windfall. There are windfall clauses in compensation plans. I like the ones that stated that any closed sale that does not follow the mapped sales process will be subject to quota analysis or quota adjustment by the sales compensation committee. And you map out the sales process, and it's really simple. It's lead qualification, lead generation, lead qualification, presentation, negotiation, close. 5 steps to the sales process. You can add more, but if they don't follow all 5 of those steps, if they don't generate the lead, if they don't qualify it, and all of a sudden they get one in an elevator, whatever it is, then you have the right as the compensation committee to analyze and adjust compensation. The other one is, let's say that you just don't have good quotas. Then I prepare for it by lowering my over quota acceleration, or having the high over quota, but then adjusting it down past a certain point, or creating things like the link I just mentioned. You can also extend the measurement period. The measurement period, extending it is it's the biggest arrow in your quiver. If you normally measure people quarterly and pay acceleration quarterly, and you have unpredictable performance, it's much more difficult to blow out an annual number than it is a quarterly number. So the volatility is going to be much lower on a bigger number than a smaller number. If you want to show for the optics, the reps, that there's huge over quota payout, you've got to protect the company past a certain point, start decelerating. The pitch I usually give to reps is, congratulations, you hit 200% of your quota. Here's the big cardboard check, President's Club. But past a certain point, that was my fault for setting quotas so low and the very poor optics I have into pipeline. I can't keep paying you that huge over quota rate. So in the plan that we're designing, we have to lower it past a certain point. We can't keep paying that in perpetuity. So past 150%, we have to lower it. It's still going to be better. It's still going to be greater than your 0 to 100 payout. Once again, 3, 5, 4. The 4 is still greater than 3. But we can't keep paying you at that souped out rate. Okay. Any others?
Thank you. Let's do one more. I'm interested in this one. Interested in what you had to say. Do you find companies making sales comp changes with increasing frequency these days?
Oh. Well, I don't know how to answer this very tactfully, but actually, I find the exact opposite.
Hmm.
I'm finding companies are almost scared to make compensation plan changes. But that's just from my sample size. Uh, Figure it this way: I've dealt with for the third quarter, I dealt with about, let's say, 50 companies. And they're mostly making minor adjustments to payout curves, to eligibility requirements. Uh, they're not making what I would say are large changes.
Mm-hmm.
Last year, I was seeing much more significant changes. Instead of adjustments to the payout curve, I would see plan metric changes, wholesale redesign of plans, uh, changing payout triggers. I think I see it in waves.
Right.
This year was the last year rather. The big flavor was moving to consumption. This year, I'm not seeing as many companies do that. I think that wave passed. I don't know, Bob. What do you see?
Yeah. I mean, I think from a macro level, maybe so. Just because there's been so much, if we take a long view, like COVID or some of the demand uncertainty we've had, supply chain things, or when there's an economic shock, interest rates, whatever, that often means we have to reevaluate and change. But from a micro level, maybe I'd agree with you.
Yeah.
Companies tend to stand pat as long as they can. So, Jason, we're at the end of the time, so I'll leave it there, man. Thank you very much for being with us. It's always great to have you.
Thank you.
Always enjoy your insights and appreciate your presentation today. And before we let everyone go, I'll remind our audience that our next Sales Management Association webcast is in just 2 days. On November 20th, we'll present a session called Untangling Complexity and Incentive Compensation. So if you like this session, you might like that one as well. You can learn more about this session coming up and register for it, and learn about many other sessions coming up here on our site at salesmanagement.org under the Events tab. I'm Bob Kelly, Sales Management Association Chairman. On behalf of Jason Rothbaum, thank you for your attention and time today. Goodbye until next time.
Bye.